Hello there, and welcome to Interviews With. I'm your host, Nick Busco, and today we have an interview with a gentleman named Newell Alexander. Newell was out on the road with Neil Young back in, I'd say, late 70s, early 80s. And Newell comes with a different perspective. He's an actor going out on the road with a crazy road crew and tour. He has some great stories, and also he can tell you about how he got on the road and how he did integrate with the crew. Yeah, sometimes it takes a while. But anyway, thanks for stopping by, and here comes Newell. Take a listen and take a look. Thanks.
I love this room.
Isn't this a great room? That's why I want.
Yeah.
There's definitely
So much fun.
a few I want to do. A few interviews I want to do here, just because
Sure.
it's great.
No, this is nice. The light's good.
It works out well. Okay, well, Newell.
Hey.
We're rolling.
All right, Nick.
One of my first questions is actually, Newell, is how did you get in the business? I mean, it's a little history about what business you were in before you kind of stepped into the music
Yeah.
business.
Well, I was, first of all, I was in the Navy. I flew jets in the Navy, but I wasn't Navy material. So after I got out of the Navy, I'd always wanted to be a cartoonist. So I went back to art school at the University of Houston, and a good buddy of mine there had a local radio hit, and it was Kenny Rogers. And Kenny and I were buddies, and we hung out and all that whole thing. And I kind of watched his career for a while as I became a little more successful as a commercial artist. And Kenny had always wanted to be a commercial artist himself, but he had a really terrific natural singing voice. So I watched him go from little local groups and things until he got into the first edition. He played for about 10 years at a Holiday Inn with a musician named Bobby Doyle, who was a blind piano player, the Bobby Doyle Trio. And I used to do all their Christmas cards. I designed a logo for them. So I kind of was friends along with this group. So when they got to be first edition, Kenny said, "I think you'd be a great road manager." So I said, "I've never ever done it before." He said, "No, but you'd be really good." So I went with him on a trip to San Francisco. Ken Cragen was his manager at that time. So I went to kind of take a look at it to see if I was going to like it. And I was totally confused by the whole thing. It didn't take me but about 2 or 3 days to realize that wasn't my kind of job. I mean, that's a hard-ass job, and you got to know what you're doing in that whole thing. Anyway, I backed off from that, and a few years later, after trying to become a film director, which I wasn't suited for, I decided to become an actor, right? So I did a few little productions in Dallas, a couple of little plays and things, and not much note really. And we did a little local theater play there at a place called Theater 3, and a casting director from LA, from Los Angeles, was in attendance, and she came back and she said, "We're doing a little movie here with Robert Blake and Charlotte Rampling and Ben Johnson. It's a race car picture for MGM, and we're looking for somebody to play Ben Johnson's sidekick." And she said, "You have a Southern accent. Why don't you come over to the Red Lion Inn and read for the producers?" I'd never done any acting jobs at all. I'd modeled for Slacks once, for a still job, but that was it. And so I went on this audition, and all these producers are there, 5 or 6 guys, and I go in, and I don't even read anything. They said, "Would you cut your hair for this job?" And I said, "I'd disfigure my face." And the guy said, "I like that." So they hired me. So I worked for 2 weeks on this movie, got into Screen Actors Guild. Ben Johnson said, "Go to Hollywood, man. You could do it." So my wife and I, we packed up and we moved to Hollywood with 5 kids, right? So I hadn't been in Hollywood for, maybe a year and a half or something. And a good buddy of mine, Jim Bashir's, was editing Human Highway, the little anti-nuke movie that Neil made in like 63. And, no, 83. 83. And so I went up to Neil's ranch. Jim was editing at Neil's ranch, and Neil said, you can bring somebody up over Christmas vacation because we're going to work over Christmas. And he said, bring friends up if you want, a couple friends, and they can stay here at the ranch. So Rosemary and I went up and stayed a week at the ranch over the Christmas break. And I got to meet Neil, and interesting guy. But while I was there, Neil had a little art project. And Bashir said, Newell does art and that whole thing. And Neil said, well, see if you can work something up, So I drew this test pattern that had the Indian head on it. I did a Neil version of that. And he liked it, and we kind of did a few pranks back and forth, just fun stuff. So New Year's Day, we were back in LA, and I get a phone call from Neil. And he said, hey, Newell, it's Neil. He said, that sounds like something out of the movie Airplane, right? Anyway. He said, I want you to go on tour with me. And I said, doing what? And he said, be my opening act. And I said, I don't do anything, I don't do anything. He said, you could be my backstage narrator. He said, I saw you as the spokesman for Chevron. I had gotten the job as the Chevron spokesman, right? All new Chevron, that thing. And he said, you can do this. He said, you got to be real smarmy. You got to play it real straight, like the funny guys do today. And I went up to the ranch, and Larry Johnson and I, your good friend Larry Johnson,
Yes.
and Neil wrote this little show called Trans Tour TV with Dan Clear. So I played Dan Clear. So here I am. I know nothing about touring, although I had traveled some. And they said, all right, we're going out. We're heading out, and my wife is home going, what's happening? So I took off on the road with Neil. I had my own bus. It said Dan Clear, on the front of the bus. It was always interesting when you'd pull into a venue and people were out there waiting for Neil's bus to come in, and they would always look at my bus and they would go, Dan Clear. Like, who the hell is that? 'Cause nobody knew who I was. They still don't, but at that time we were trying to educate them, right, as to who Dan Clear was. But it was very interesting going out.
Well, that's it. I mean, one of the things is that both you and I did that tour. That was
Oh,
solo.
yeah, we did.
Wasn't it solo? Was
Yeah,
the name of the
yeah,
tour?
it absolutely was.
And I remember, who is Dan Clear? I remember that. Who is this guy?
Who the hell is this guy? Yeah.
He's coming in, and honestly, it's like, one of those, well, he's older. Will he understand the road? You know what I mean? That's kind of where it was at. 'Cause
Yeah.
you were what, around
49.
49
Yeah.
years old,
Yeah. And that was old.
That was
for
old.
them.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not old now.
Well, it's what 30 years
Right,
later.
I know,
here I am.
right? That's the thing. And I remember the excitement of it, actually, and how it really worked very well.
Well, I first got on the bus, I'd really hardly ever even met any of these guys, and when I first got on the bus, I was, I didn't know what the rules were, any of that stuff. So I brought my stuff on the bus, and Tim Mulligan is there. And, gruff Tim, Tim is there. And so Tim said, do you smoke weed? And I said, sure. Like who doesn't, right? So he said, did you bring any with you? And I said, yes, I did. And I had actually grown a couple of plants in North Hollywood. This is in the early 80s, when they tear chest off for growing
And they
weed,
put you in
right? That
jail,
whole thing.
yeah.
So I grew a couple of plants. They were awful. You know, I didn't know anything about cultivating them, you know, what to do with it at all. But it was green and you could light it, right? So he said, let's see it. So I had this baggie of this weed with me, and he takes one look at it and he smokes, he says, where did you get this? And I said, I grew it in my yard. He said, where do you live? I said, North Hollywood. And he, you know, by the driver, there's a little garbage thing that has a little lid on it. And he just opened that lid and he threw my weed into the garbage like this. And he said, we won't be smoking any crap like this on this tour, pal. You know, and he was right.
No, I know.
He was right.
I know. I understand that. I understand
No,
that.
it was very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Before we were getting ready to go out on tour, they had a meeting of all the department heads, you know, all the head grips and the mixers and, you know, and all those, you know, Tim Foster, you know, all the really main guys were there, but maybe 10 guys. And we were all staying on the ranch at those 3 different houses that Neil has on his ranch up north. And we were staying at the White House, and it had a big den that had a pool table. And off of the den were 2 or 3 little small bedrooms, you know, where people could stay, you know, that whole thing. You know, you could bring a band up there, rehearse, and you had a place for them to stay. There was food, you know, I mean, it was quite nice. So we're there, and we're there having fun and everything, and Larry said, I'm getting so tired, man. He said, I'm gonna hit the sack. And Larry and I had been assigned these 2 rooms, right, that whole thing. So I was right next to Larry. So they had one of Neil's big time advisors. He's there, and he had brought his girlfriend down from San Francisco. You know, cute girl, you know, long brown hair, you know, real pretty and everything. And they got into this terrible argument, you know, that whole thing. Mm-hmm. Anyway, they were arguing like crazy. I went to bed. I said, you know what, I'm going to bed, this whole thing. And Larry said, be sure and wake me up in the morning, because Neil jumped my ass, you know, for being late the other day. So I've gone to bed. I'm expecting him to come to bed, you know, and they're playing cards and shooting pool and all that whole thing. So that next morning, I have set my alarm. I got up, and Larry said, don't forget to wake me up, that whole thing. So I got up, and there are a couple of guys in the kitchen have made some coffee, that whole thing. So I go next door to where Larry is sleeping, right, that whole thing. And I open the door to this little bedroom. There is Larry, his long hair, you know, they're like this. And so I went in and I grabbed these sheets and I jerked them down, you know, and I said, you know, drop your cock and grab your socks. It's time to get up. You know, I just, you know, get up, Larry, get up. And it was this girlfriend. She screams, ah, that whole thing. I'm totally shocked because I thought it was L.A. Johnson. Anyway, she and her boyfriend had gotten into a big fight, and L.A. Johnson and he had gone up to the Red House, you know, and he gave her the room there, and he went up and stayed with Briggs, legendary, you know, music guy. And I, you know, Neil's one of Neil's really best creative guys that he ever worked with, you know. I thought Briggs is going to kick my ass, you know, because this girl was going, you know, that whole thing. So anyway, she takes Briggs over the side, tells the story. Briggs comes back and Briggs says, you're going to be okay, pal. He said, you'll be fine on the road, you know, and he's hardly spoke to me before that. You know, he was kind of derisive, you know, and he called me, his nickname for me was Hollywood, you know, every time, hey Hollywood, how you doing, buddy? You know, that whole thing.
Of course,
because I'm, you know, I mean, to a lot of those, you know, guys, I didn't belong there. And we were always cooking some kind of stuff up, you know, to do during those shows, something wacky, you know. It got real interesting, and I would prank, you know, crew members and things, you know, things like that. But they would always get me back, you know.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, yes, you did. Washington, when at Philadelphia, when. they had these two strippers come in, and L.A. Johnson had me locked off like this, and these strippers were trying to take my pants off,
Yep.
you know, while I'm doing my Neil announcing stuff. It was funny stuff, you know. The night they...
Kind of like Ernie Koufax. That's what reminds me.
Please,
Right,
please.
you know?
They handcuffed me to a plastic sex dummy, you know, a life-size one of those.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that
One
was
of those
Murph.
things.
That was Murph's dummy, I think. Our truck,
It
our
was-
bus driver.
I think it was. And they took me in this big fucking truck stop, you know, for my birthday,
Yep.
right? And I've got this sex doll handcuffed like that, and they sat me right at the main counter, right? That I'm sitting like this, having breakfast with this plastic thing. You know, oh, they love that.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh no, everybody was into mischief there. There's no question about it. I mean, just what happened with me was I remember waiting in line at some place, I don't know where, what hotel it was, and our buddy Deborah from Australia and Mary were behind me. I had a little pair of shorts on. She pulled my shorts down.
She, you know, she got hers though. If you'll remember, in the parking lot at Universal, right? And the bus was back like that, and she was
The
on
lead
top.
sled.
She was on top. Was it you or was it? I don't know who it was that sneaked up behind her and pulled her.
It could have
pants
been
down.
me. I don't
think
remember
it may
that
have
because
been-
it was
may
probably
have been you.
retribution for what happened to me.
It may have been you, but she was standing on top of Neil's bus like this, woo-hoo, woo-hoo, and it might have been you.
It could have
but
been
boy,
Mary. It could have been any of
Yeah,
us.
but boy, right up behind her, she had on these big old shorts, and just a whack like that. Oh man! She said, "You'll pay for this."
Oh, you little bugger.
But we had a lot of great stuff.
We had a lot of fun, and we worked really hard. That
yeah.
was the two things that
believe
you
me,
know,
it's the hardest I've ever worked. I think.
Well, you know, this kind of brings me into this. It's like, how do you feel about? I mean, it is like a family out there. Don't
Oh
you
sure,
think?
oh sure, and you get to know people on a different level. You know, I mean, you have that. There's something about that camaraderie.
There is.
And brother, anytime there's any kind of trouble or anything like that, you know, they're like carnies. Boy, everybody pulls together. You know.
No, that's one of the things that I've noticed too. Is like doing this documentary, getting reacquainted with people I haven't talked to in 35,
Yeah,
40
it's interesting.
years. It's like they're there. It's like
Yeah.
one of those things where, you know, you haven't talked to your friend in 30 years and you talk to him, it's like no time has passed.
Sure.
And there is I don't know about now, but I know when we were touring, there was that camaraderie and that family
Yeah.
feeling that we
Yeah.
covered each other's asses.
That's right.
You know,
That's
whether
right.
it be, you know, somebody gets thrown in jail or,
Yeah,
you know, or
no.
did something stupid at the, you know, we definitely.
You know, you're not out there by yourself.
Yeah, yeah. And,
Yeah.
and I know that's one of the things I missed when I stopped touring was that camaraderie
Yeah.
that we had. And
Yeah.
it was, you know, I can compare it maybe a little bit to fraternity-like, but a little grosser.
If it can be. I remember they had an old mic, one of those real long microphones. Remember those old long mics?
Yeah.
That was Andy Williams' mic, right? I mean, that was be careful with this because this belonged to Andy Williams, you know. Anyway, it was kind of a long mic like that. And we were in Detroit, and I used to interview kids, and I'd give them tickets, you know, for interviewing. I'd ask them a question, you know, what's the biggest selling album of '72, you know, and whether they got it right or not, you know, of course it was Heart of Gold, right? So whether they got it right or not, I'd give them a couple of tickets to the show, which is usually sold out, you know, so they were thrilled. And so I'm outside, I guess, Cobo Hall in Detroit, and I have this mic and that whole thing, and there are two girls there, and I'm interviewing them like that, and this big biker walks up, and he goes, "Leave those girls alone," you know. And I said, "What?" You know, and I've got LA, just me and LA out there. And he said, "Leave those girls alone." And for some reason, it just got me. And I said, "You know what? I'll fucking beat you to death with this goddamn microphone, you son of a bitch." You know, like this, and the guy's like this, you know, like that. And I said, "You better fucking back off, man. I'm telling you right now." So he did, right? So after the show, Neil gets me. L.A. Johnson had shown Neil that footage, and Neil goes, "No, no, 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 no." He said, "They're like Baby Huey, these crowds." He said, "They may seem innocent, but," he said, "they can roll over you, and buddy, they can cause you big time harm. You know, these audiences." He said, "If they go the wrong way," he said, "it can be real trouble." And he said, "Don't you ever go out, you know, to do those interviews without taking Paul, you know, Big Paul, the enforcer." And Paul used to go out with me, and 3 or 4 times, you know, Paul had to, you know, do somebody, you know, when they'd get rowdy with you, you know, because you're out there and the kids are drunk and, you know, all that whole thing.
Yeah.
But Neil would protect you. I mean, they protected. So it's interesting how important it was for me to be accepted by the crew. And I did my very best to try to, you know, get along with people, you know, and all that whole thing. We lost one of our lighting guys. They fired him. And they brought in a guy who had just been working on Michael Jackson tour and hotshot lighting guy. So we were someplace, I don't know, Louisville or someplace like that, and Tim Mulligan said, he said, "I know you can't see your screen while you're in it." He said, "But this guy's washing your screen out, you know, with his lights." He said, "We can't see your image on the screen because it's the way the guys lit it."
Right.
So I went to him and I said, "Hey, you know, I was talking to Tim," and he said, "You're washing out my screen, so, you know, they can't see me." And the guy goes, "Fuck you." I said, "What?" He goes, "Fuck you, man." I said, No, that's not." He said, "I light my own." He said, "I do the lighting here." And I said, "So you're telling me fuck you?" Because, you know, and he said, "That's right." And I said, "Hey, great." You know, so I went straight to Neil, you know, and I said, "Hey, Neil," you know, and Neil goes, "Okay, right, great." So half an hour later, this guy's going, "Hey, man, Jesus, I didn't know, you know, you went straight to Neil? Goddamn, Neil fired me, man." He said, "Come on, go and tell Neil that you know." And I said, "No, you know, I'm going to tell you what you told me. Fuck you," you know.
Wow.
So they fired his ass. You know, they brought in another guy who was terrific. You know, that whole thing. But I got the backing of the whole crew on that. You know, and I made a big mistake with Mulligan. You know, early on, he was the crew racquetball champion.
I didn't even know that.
You know, so they would play racquetball every once in a while when they were places. I was the Hollywood YMCA B racquetball champion. So I played a lot, you know. And so I went in and somebody said, "Yeah, you play racquetball." And I said, "Yeah, I play something." I said, "Well, Tim plays, you know, and he's just waxed everybody in that whole thing." And so I went and watched him play, and he really, you know, he really wasn't very good, you know.
I hear you.
We played out here. You know, he's a mixer. That's what he does. So anyway, I waxed his ass real good in a game, and he and I weren't friends after that. You know,
Really?
Yeah.
Mulligan took things seriously.
Oh yeah,
He did.
No. And I have to admit, I humiliated him.
Sorry, no, I don't.
You know, and it wasn't much. You know.
Well, so when did you stop working with Neil? I mean, was it the Dan clear and then it kind of dissipated? Is that what happened?
No. After the tour ended, there were several shows. I think we did one show back east at the Beacon Theater, where I should have brought my trophy. I've got like a 4-foot trophy that Neil and the crew gave me for being the best backstage announcer in rock and roll.
I'll tell you, that's great. You know what? I still think somebody should revise that. I don't know if anybody's doing that now, but I really think that's still a good idea.
It's a good way to go. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And with the projection systems they have now, I mean, my God, they have those big LED screens that are perfect.
Yeah, I'm surprised.
We had problems in those days because they had a liquid gate.
Yeah.
with this big projector, and I mean, it had to be tuned down to,
Right, I'm trying to think. It wasn't the Ida4. I forgot what it was, but it was. Yeah, I do remember that.
but
I can't
and it
remember
was
what they
huge.
call
The
it
thing
anymore,
was
yeah.
huge,
Well, video was new when we were
Yeah,
doing
brand
it.
new.
I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, that's why lighting designers had a big attitude. But also, too, the gentleman who designed the lights when I was working with you guys was Stephen Bickford. And he was very aware of the screen. He
Yeah.
was, he did really
Yeah,
well.
he was.
And Feta ran the board, Mark
Yeah.
Feta.
That's right. That's right. And Tom Stern.
Tom Stern.
Tom Stern. Tom Stern is now Clint Eastwood's cinematographer.
Yeah,
he shoots all of Clint Eastwood's movies.
Yeah, he's-
And
This is the kind of stuff that happens
Yeah.
to us out there. I
Sure.
mean, Deborah from Australia, she's actually training horses. She's rodeo.
Oh, sure.
I cannot believe
Sure.
it. And Mary Took has one of the biggest event companies, I would have to say, in Sydney.
Wow.
He's all over the world doing
Wow.
events. So these are people that, we were just kind of having fun and
Sure.
learning.
Oh,
and
yeah.
We paid our dues,
Yeah.
and we focused and we mixed and we.
and worked your ass off.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
We worked a lot. And we
Yeah.
had some fun. And yes, there were drugs involved. There's no
Yeah.
question about that.
Another thing that I like about rock and roll, and especially about Neil, is the commitment that the crews have toward them. It's nobody sits back and asks about a lot of questions. If Neil says the stage needs to be 6 inches higher, and you have to tear it all down to make it 6 inches higher, you do that. You don't go, gee, Neil, why do we do this? Or, ever.
Nope.
It's and how do you become a roadie? How do you become a grip? Are there schools? How does that all happen? Very, very interesting.
Well, back then in the day, you just fell into it.
Yeah.
I mean, doing these interviews, I met a gentleman, and it's on topic actually, who said the reason why I got in the business is I was doing audio for cars, and I did 2 audio systems for Lionel Richie. And the second one he heard, he came to me and he goes, "I want you to come out
Exactly,
on the road."
yeah.
So this is the kind, which it's like, huh? Nowadays it's a struggle.
Oh, boy.
And nowadays
Yeah.
it's class. They have, Verilight class. They have this class. They have rigging classes.
Sure.
We
Oh,
had
you
none of
bet.
that.
Yeah,
We
no.
were just punting. And
Yeah.
thank God the riggers, who I have to talk to some of those guys too. They were good. They knew what they were doing. They had training. And one of the people I would like to talk to is a guy named Joe Branham, who was one of the original riggers, who actually got his chops working in the circus.
Wow.
That's what I
well,
found a lot.
it's rock and roll is a circus.
It's a
There's no
circus.
question
It's
about
a
it.
circus.
Yeah. Remember Lyle
Oh, absolutely.
Centola?
Yeah.
You should interview Lyle Centola.
Well, actually, I saw Lyle a couple years ago because I went to a Springsteen show out in Boston, and he had his son working with him,
yeah.
which was great because he was like giving his son a hard time. And Lyle kind of looked at me and winked. You know how Lyle is.
Well, I remember not so gentle
Yes.
Lyle. In those days.
Against, I remember him arguing with Bill Graham outside at the water park. He got into Bill Graham's ass.
Oh, yeah.
I could not believe it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they were down on Bill Graham anyway. I wasn't allowed to interview Bill Graham. Until we did, we then did, after the tour, we did a big Cow Palace show, that Neil did, called the third greatest garage band in the world, I think, or the neighborhood or something. Anyway,
Right.
It was a fun show, and I did a whole bunch of stuff through the big van that they had there with the nitrogen doors and all of that whole thing. We did a whole tech thing where Larry followed me with a camera and we walked all the way through that thing and all the way back. And then I did interview Bill. And at that time he had a commercial running with that guitar player.
Santana?
It was with
Carlos?
Santana, where he and Santana talked on the phone, that whole thing. So we had, somebody had ripped a payphone off the wall, and I had this receiver and the cord like this stuck into my pocket. And during my Bill Graham interview, I said, "Oh, hold on a second, Bill." And I go, "Yes, hello?" And I said, "Oh, Bill, it's Santana. It's for you." And he takes it, goes, "Hello? Hello?" He said, "Nobody's there." You know, that whole thing. L.A. Johnson is just pissing his pants. He's back there dancing. Oh, you know. But we like to prank people.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
they wouldn't let me interview David Geffen because of the big battle that Neil was having with Geffen at that time over the material that he was making music.
Let's talk about L.A. Johnson.
Ooh.
You know, that's
Yeah.
what I like to do because Larry's
Yeah.
not around to speak for himself.
Yeah.
So I'd really like to get people like yourself, and hopefully I can talk with Neil and talk him into giving me a little interview about Larry. You know?
Yeah. L.A. Johnson was originally got his start as far as when I began to know him was he was involved with Woodstock and the making of the movie Woodstock, and Larry was the guy in charge of all the sound, you know, with a filmmaker that I'm not going to remember his name, who's no longer around. But Woodstock really, really gave him his start. You know, he was nominated for Academy Award for Woodstock, and that kind of put him into the mainstream of rock and roll. You know, I met Larry, I think, when they were doing Human Highway, and Larry and I then did a lot of extra stuff. We shot some commercials. We did a sports show that was all water. It dealt with fishing, surfing, river rafting, and that whole thing. And L.A. and I and a little film crew went to Hawaii. We went up to Northern California. We went up on the Kern River. I mean, we had, for about 5 weeks, just had one of the most wonderful times. You know, we spent like 3 weeks in Hawaii, fishing.
You were bill fishing, weren't
Oh
you?
yeah,
That's what it
oh
was.
sure,
Yeah.
big game, big tarpon, and well, not tarpon, but big
Sailfish,
tuna, and just
right,
all the
sailfish.
big stuff, you know, that whole thing. And we did some windsurfing. You know, we covered all these sports and things, and there was always some kind of a little tongue-in-cheek thing going on, you know, as we're doing all of this stuff, you know. Talking about the killer Kern River, you know, all that whole thing. It was really, really fun, but it was before its time. You know, there were 3 networks at that time. You know, with all the sports shows and things there are now. This show would go, you know, it really would.
It would.
It was a fun little show, and we went to a lot of different places. Of course, you see dozens of that kind of. It was like a travelogue kind of a thing, but just lots and lots of fun. You know. It was good stuff.
Yeah, and Larry, you said something in one of your emails, and I have to agree. It seems like Larry really has never gotten his due, so to speak.
No.
You know what I mean?
No.
Even from people that he was very close to.
He was in the shadow of Neil.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that if Larry had kind of got this may be a little off, but there a lot of guys will work for Neil, and they'll only work for Neil. I don't think he demands that of them necessarily, but a lot of guys they become like disciples of Neil, and Neil takes care of them. You know, he makes sure that everybody's okay. You know, nobody's going to starve to death. You know, like Ben Keith. You know, the slide player. You know, Ben was with Neil. You know, all those last years and stuff. You know, Neil took care of him. Neil takes care of his people. You know, the people who stick close to him. There's a world beyond Neil for me. But some people, some guys are just so, you know, I don't know if it's they're such big fans or that whole thing. And to tell the truth, Neil is a really, really nice guy, you know, to work with, you know, that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But as, you know, as just a single employer, you know.
Well, that's what Larry pretty much ended up being.
And Larry bought into all of that, and he was really very successful at it.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about both of those guys is you could come up with a good idea, and they wouldn't just knock it down because it wasn't theirs. You know, they'd explore it. I mean, you know, if it's a good idea, Neil's going to go with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Well, that's one of the things I did notice about Neil and Larry. You know, they were willing to collaborate.
Oh yeah. Oh,
you know,
absolutely.
which is big in this
Sure.
business. You know, to have that kind of opportunity to collaborate with someone.
Yeah.
Neil is a practical joker. And we know
I know
this,
he is.
You know, and I remember, and this is just something that on the side, I remember being in the back of a van after a concert, and Neil was in that van. It was somebody's van, a
Sure.
van.
Yeah.
And he was in the back, in the dark. And I remember the gentleman was talking about the concert, and he says, you know, man, Neil Young is really dark. You know, and Neil's in the back giggling, you know
Sure.
what I mean? And so it's like, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
You know, and he just kind of smirked, and I just remember that because he didn't say anything. He was just like a fly on the wall.
No. Yeah.
You know, but he had that. He always had that. Not always, but every once in a while, he get that twinkle, mischievous look in his eye.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. No, I've been the brunt of some of those. I pulled a few pranks on him. In fact, I think Joel Bernstein still isn't speaking to me over some of the things that I did for him.
You know, I actually talked to Joe probably about 6 months ago, you
Yeah.
know, and he sounds good. You know, I'm going to be getting some advice on photographs since he's the master of photographs
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned, you know. But he's another one I want to talk
Sure. No.
I myself, I mean, I'm working from 69 to 85.
Wow.
Those
That's
are
a
the
good
years.
period.
Those were the years.
Those are that may be those may be the golden years of a lot of things.
Yeah.
I'll guarantee you it's the golden years for actors.
Yeah.
Because the great commercial boom was in the 70s and 80s. When you do one commercial, you know, you work one day, you make $30,000-$40,000, you know, and if you got several of those, you're making a damn good living. That doesn't exist anymore. You know, with the way that they now know how to run commercials, how to stream them, you know, all of that whole thing. So a commercial that you made, you know, $50,000 before, you make about $5 today.
Well,
I have 2 or 3 running right now, and they're pooty. You know, I mean, it's not like it used to be. Those golden years are over.
Well, that's why I got it. That's why I wanted to be an actor. I said I want to do commercials. I mean, that's kind of, I saw what was going on. People are like making $100,000 on a run, you know, and
Sure.
I'm going, well, it's a great part-time job. You know
Yeah,
what
it
I
is.
mean? And then it changed. It definitely
it's
changed.
gone now.
And it is gone. You know?
Yeah, and the celebrities
Well, they sucked it
learn
up
how
too.
to learn how to get that.
That's what that was.
But then the next big boon was voiceovers.
Yeah.
You know, Jim Bashir is who I met at Neil's Ranch. You know, when he was editing up there, is head of DreamWorks post production, and I have a group called L.A. Mad Dogs, and we do all of those films. Shrek, How to Train Your. In fact, we're doing How to Train Your Dragon 2 right now over there. But that was great for a while. But now that they stream things rather than sell DVDs, you know, it used to be Shrek. You make $40,000 off of 2 days on Shrek, and now they stream it. You know, they don't sell as many DVDs, so the DVD residuals aren't like they used to be. You know, it's very interesting.
Yeah, you know. And
Times they are a changing.
yeah, and everybody seems to be. The people who work are making less money, and the people who don't work
Aren't working, yeah.
are making lots of money.
It's the haves and have-nots.
Yeah, that's really
just
the
like
case.
just like society. You know, a lot of people have a lot of money, and a lot of people don't have any.
Yeah, you know. and us in the middle have to go, oh God.
Yeah.
I want to go back to talking about Neil and taking care of his crew. That to me is rare.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah.
so
No.
what,
Yeah, the Newell family. There are different connections, to Newell through different people, and my connection obviously was through L.A. Johnson. Even though I know Elliot Roberts and all of that. L.A. was my connection to Newell. So kind of losing that, I in a way lost a position. Even though I know that if I saw Newell, he would be gracious and all that whole thing. But I'm no longer under that umbrella, the Newell umbrella. But you could go a litany of guys, who've worked for Newell, and for years and years and years, and stay close to him, and all of that. Yeah. But but it's a hard club to get into.
Yeah,
that's the deal.
It is. I what the funny thing is, when I was touring and I was working with all these people, I didn't even notice it was a hard club because I was in it.
Yes, exactly. Oh, sure.
You don't notice it. And all of a sudden, as you back away from it, you go, wow, I don't think I can get back in that club anymore.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But even though you are because you've been in the club and you're a little,
Sure.
further out. Recently I was hanging around with an old friend of mine, Bugs, Alan Weindell, who's Tom Petty's guitar tech. Mm-hmm. And when I went to rehearsals, it was like old times.
Yeah.
I walked in,
Yeah.
hey,
Nobody
Nick,
questioned you. Yeah.
And I could do whatever I
Sure.
want, the protocol has already been set, so I get it, and to me that was nice. It was nice to go back and be welcomed back. And again, that's one of the reasons why I think I'm doing this too. It's the welcoming back of people that I used to know and the reconnection.
Well, and you think that your separation is like permanent and that whole thing. However, a couple of years ago, my son and a buddy of his, who are both big, huge Neil Young fans, they both play, and they wanted to go to the Bridge concert, so I called Elliot, and I got him tickets, and passes and all that whole thing. So after the concert was over, I got a call from this friend of my son's, and he said, "Thank you so much for lining us up, up there." And I said, "Did you have good tickets?" And he said, "I don't know. We never sat in them." He said, "We were backstage the whole time." He said, "Nobody questioned us." He said, "I felt like we could have gotten on Neil's plane, if he had one, and fly someplace with him." He said it was really wonderful. He said maybe one of the most fun concerts I've ever been to, But he said, of course, I'm in the green room with Neil Young. He said, how much better is that?
You can't get much better than that.
No.
Let me check how much tape we have here.
Yeah. Let me make a run to the Trois. Ah.
And there you have it. Thanks, Newell, for spending the time with me and giving a great interview. There'll be more coming along as we go through this year. And thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. Until next time, Nick Busco here.